1970. In the music room at Graceland, the clock showed 7 p.m. Elvis Presley sat at the piano, playing the melody of a new song, when his 2-year-old daughter Lisa Marie quietly entered the room. When she reached for her father's microphone with her tiny hands, no one could have known that what was about to happen would become a part of music history. The golden autumn light filtered through the tall windows of Graceland's music room, casting warm shadows across the Persian rugs and polished mahogany surfaces. Elvis had retreated here after a long day of meetings with Colonel Parker, his manager, about upcoming tour dates and recording sessions. The weight of fame, the constant demands, the endless phone calls, it all melted away when he sat at that piano bench. His fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, finding melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep within his soul. This was where the real magic happened, not on stage in front of thousands, but here in the quiet sanctuary of his home, where music was pure and unfiltered by the expectations of the world. The house was settling into its evening rhythm. Priscilla was upstairs, probably reading in their bedroom, and Vernon was in his study reviewing contracts and financial documents. The staff moved quietly through the mansion, respecting the sanctity of Elvis's creative time. Mrs. Nancy, the nanny, had put Lisa Marie down for her afternoon nap hours ago, but the little girl had a habit of waking up and wandering the house like a curious explorer. Elvis was completely absorbed in his music when he heard the soft patter of tiny feet on the marble floor of the hallway. He smiled to himself, recognizing the distinctive sound of his daughter's approach. Lisa Marie had been walking for only a few months, but she already moved with a confidence that reminded him of Priscilla's graceful stride. The music room door, which Elvis always left slightly ajar during his practice sessions, opened wider as a small figure appeared in the doorway. Lisa Marie stood there for a moment, her wild blonde curls catching the light like spun gold. She was wearing a little pink dress that Priscilla had bought for her in Memphis, and her bright blue eyes, so much like Elvis's own, were wide with curiosity. "Well, hello there, little darlin'," Elvis said softly, his fingers never stopping their gentle movement across the keys. "Did you have a good nap?" Lisa Marie didn't answer with words. At 2 years old, her vocabulary was still limited to a few dozen words, but her ability to communicate was far beyond her years. She toddled into the room with the fearless determination that only small children possess, her eyes fixed on something that had captured her complete attention: the microphone. Elvis kept a vintage RCA microphone on a stand next to the piano, the same model he had used for some of his earliest recordings at Sun Studios. It wasn't connected to anything in the music room. It was more of a decorative piece, a reminder of where he had come from and how far he had traveled. The microphone stood about 3 feet high, putting it just within reach of Lisa Marie's curious little hands. She moved toward it like a moth drawn to a flame, her small fingers reaching up to touch the cool metal surface. Elvis watched her with amusement, continuing to play a soft melody that seemed to provide a soundtrack to her exploration. "That's Daddy's microphone, sweetheart," he said gently, his voice carrying the warm southern accent that millions of fans had grown to love. "That's where the magic happens." But Lisa Marie wasn't content to just touch the microphone. With the single-minded determination of a toddler, she wrapped both her tiny hands around the microphone stand and began to pull it down toward her level. The stand was heavier than she expected, and it wobbled precariously. Elvis's hands froze on the piano keys, his heart skipping a beat as he watched his daughter struggle with the microphone stand. In that moment, every parental instinct told him to rush over and help her, to prevent her from potentially hurting herself or breaking the equipment. But something deeper, something more profound, told him to wait and watch. Lisa Marie grunted with effort, her little face scrunched up in concentration as she managed to tilt the microphone toward her. The stand tilted at an angle, but it was stable enough that she could reach the microphone itself. With both hands, she grasped the vintage RCA microphone and lifted it toward her face. What happened next would be burned into Elvis's memory forever. Lisa Marie, still holding the microphone with both hands, opened her mouth and began to make sounds. Not words, not recognizable melodies, but pure, uninhibited vocal expressions. She babbled and cooed and made little singing sounds, her voice carrying through the room with surprising clarity and volume. But it wasn't just noise. There was something musical about the sounds she was making, something that suggested an innate understanding of rhythm and melody. She would make a sound, pause as if listening to its echo, then make another sound in a different pitch. It was as if she was having a conversation with the room itself, herself, using her voice as an instrument of exploration and joy. Elvis sat transfixed at the piano, his hands motionless on the keys, watching his daughter's first real interaction with a microphone. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room, but he didn't notice. Time seemed suspended as he observed this moment of pure musical discovery. Lisa Marie's babbling began to take on a more rhythmic quality. She seemed to be responding to the acoustics of the room, the way her voice bounced off the high ceilings and wood-paneled walls. Without any conscious understanding of what she was doing, she was learning about sound, about projection, about the relationship between voice and space. Elvis felt something stir deep in his chest, an emotion so complex and overwhelming that he couldn't immediately identify it. Pride, certainly, but also something much deeper. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition that his daughter possessed something special, something that couldn't be taught or manufactured. He began to play again, very softly, his fingers finding a simple melody in a major key. The music seemed to encourage Lisa Marie, and her vocalizations began to change in response to what she was hearing. She started to sway slightly, her whole body moving to rhythms that only she could feel. The microphone was almost as big as she was, and watching her handle it with such natural ease was both adorable and somehow profound. She held it like she had been born to it, with the same unconscious confidence that Elvis had always felt when he stepped up to a microphone. As Elvis played, he began to hum along with his daughter's impromptu vocal performance. His rich baritone voice joined her higher, sweeter tones, creating an impromptu duet that no one else would ever hear. Father and daughter, making music together in the most natural, unforced way imaginable. Lisa Marie seemed to sense that something special was happening. She looked over at her father, her blue eyes sparkling with delight, and gave him one of her brilliant smiles. In that smile, Elvis saw echoes of his own mother, Gladys, who had passed away when Lisa Marie was still in the womb. He saw traces of Priscilla's beauty and grace, but most of all, he saw something uniquely Lisa Marie, something that belonged to no one but her. The little girl continued to experiment with her voice, making sounds that ranged from whispered murmurs to enthusiastic shouts. She discovered that she could make the microphone feedback by holding it too close to her mouth, and the electronic squeal seemed to delight rather than frighten her. She laughed, a sound like silver bells, and tried to recreate the feedback deliberately. Elvis found himself laughing too, not at her, but with her, sharing in the pure joy of musical discovery. This was why he had fallen in love with music in the first place, not for the fame or the money or the screaming crowds, but for moments exactly like this, moments when music was just sound and rhythm and the human voice expressing something that couldn't be captured in any other way. The afternoon stretched on, with Lisa Marie commanding the microphone like a tiny performer. She seemed to have an intuitive understanding that this was her time, her moment to shine. Elvis became her accompanist, following her lead, letting her vocal experiments guide his piano playing. At one point, she began to make sounds that were clearly attempts at singing. They weren't words, and they weren't any melody that Elvis recognized, but they had the structure and flow of song. She would hold certain notes longer than others, creating phrases that had beginnings, middles, and ends. Her sense of timing was remarkable for someone so young. Elvis found himself thinking about his own childhood, about how he had first discovered his love for music. His mother had sung him lullabies, and he had grown up listening to gospel music in church and country music on the radio. But his first real musical awakening had happened when he was around Lisa Marie's age, when he had heard a particular song that had spoken to something deep inside his soul. He remembered being 3 years old, sitting on the front porch of their tiny house in Tupelo, Mississippi. His mother Gladys was hanging laundry on the line, humming an old gospel tune called In the Sweet By and By. The melody had floated through the humid air like something magical, and young Elvis had felt something stir inside him that he couldn't name. He had tried to hum along, his tiny voice joining his mother's, and Gladys had stopped what she was doing to listen. "You got music in you, baby," she had told him, kneeling down to his level and smoothing his unruly hair. "I can hear it trying to get out." Those words had stayed with him throughout his entire career, through every recording session and concert and moment of doubt. His mother had been the first person to recognize that music wasn't just something he enjoyed, it was something that lived inside him, demanding expression. Now, watching Lisa Marie with that microphone, he could see the same thing happening. The music wasn't something she was learning or copying, it was something that was already there, waiting to be discovered. Her approach to the microphone was instinctive, natural, as if she had been having conversations with music her entire short life. Watching his daughter now, he wondered if this was her musical awakening. If this moment, this afternoon in the music room at Graceland, would be the memory she would carry with her for the rest of her life, as the moment when she first understood that music was magic. The quality of light in the room began to change as the sun moved lower in the sky. The golden afternoon light deepened to amber, and the shadows grew longer. But neither Elvis nor Lisa Marie seemed to notice the passage of time. They were lost in their musical world, father and daughter connected by something deeper than words. Lisa Marie's performance began to wind down as her energy started to flag. She was still very young, and this had been an intense period of concentration and activity for her, but she didn't want to give up the microphone. When Elvis saw that she was getting tired, he stood up from the piano bench and walked over to where she stood. "Having fun with Daddy's microphone, little girl?" he asked, kneeling down so that he was at her eye level. Lisa Marie nodded enthusiastically, clutching the microphone protectively against her chest. She had discovered something wonderful, and she wasn't ready to let it go. Elvis gently took hold of the microphone stand and adjusted it back to its proper height. Then he reached out and carefully took the microphone from Lisa Marie's small hands. For a moment it looked like she might protest, but Elvis had a better idea. He lifted his daughter up, settling her comfortably in his arms, and then held the microphone so that they could both share it. Lisa Marie's face lit up with delight as she realized that the musical fun wasn't over. "Sing with Daddy," Elvis said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. And she did. Lisa Marie opened her mouth and began to make her musical sounds again, but this time Elvis joined her. His deep, rich voice blended with her sweet, innocent tones, creating a harmony that was unlike anything he had ever experienced in a recording studio or on a concert stage. They sang together, father and daughter, making up melodies as they went along. There were no words, no structure, no concern for commercial appeal or artistic merit. It was just pure, unfiltered musical expression, the kind that comes from the heart and touches the soul. Elvis found himself getting emotional as they sang together. This wasn't just a cute moment with his daughter. This was a profound experience that connected him to something he had almost forgotten in the whirlwind of his professional life. The simple joy of making music for no other reason than because it felt good. Lisa Marie seemed to sense the emotional weight of the moment too. She reached up with one tiny hand and touched her father's cheek, her blue eyes serious and knowing. In that gesture, Elvis felt more love and understanding than he had experienced in months of touring and recording and performing. The room had grown quiet, except for their voices. The rest of Graceland seemed to have faded away, leaving just the two of them in their musical bubble. Elvis held his daughter close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, and continued to sing with her until her eyelids began to grow heavy. As Lisa Marie's energy finally began to fade, her vocalizations became softer and more rhythmic, almost like the musical babbling that babies do when they're falling asleep. Elvis recognized the signs that she was getting sleepy, but he didn't want this moment to end. He began to hum a lullaby that his mother had sung to him when he was Lisa Marie's age. It was an old gospel song, simple and sweet, with a melody that seemed to wrap around you like a warm blanket. Lisa Marie's eyes began to close as her father's voice filled the room with gentle, loving sounds. But even as she grew sleepier, Lisa Marie continued to hold onto the microphone with one small hand, as if she didn't want to let go of this magical object that had given her such joy. Elvis smiled at her determination and gently began to loosen her fingers from the microphone. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "The microphone will be here tomorrow. We can sing together again." Reluctantly, Lisa Marie allowed her father to take the microphone from her grasp, but as soon as it was gone, she reached for it again, making it clear that this was not just a passing fancy. Something about the microphone, about the act of singing, about the music itself, had captured her in a way that was deep and lasting. Elvis set the microphone back on its stand and continued to hold his daughter, rocking her gently as he hummed. The room was growing darker as evening approached, but he made no move to turn on the lights. There was something peaceful peaceful and sacred about the gathering shadows, something that seemed to honor the significance of what had just happened. As Lisa Marie finally drifted off to sleep in her father's arms, Elvis reflected on what he had witnessed. This hadn't been just a cute moment or a funny story to tell at dinner parties. This had been a revelation, a glimpse into his daughter's soul that showed him something remarkable and profound. Lisa Marie had a natural affinity for music, that much was clear. But more than that, she had shown an understanding of performance, of the relationship between performer and microphone, that suggested an innate grasp of what it meant to be a musical artist. At 2 years old, she had commanded that microphone with a confidence and naturalness that many professional singers never achieved. Elvis thought about his own relationship with the microphone, how it had been both his tool and his companion throughout his career. The microphone was where vulnerability met power, where the most intimate emotions could be broadcast to thousands or even millions of people. It was a magical object, a conduit for human connection that transcended physical boundaries, and today, his daughter had discovered that magic for herself. He carried the sleeping Lisa Marie upstairs to her nursery, moving quietly through the halls of Graceland. Priscilla met them at the top of the stairs, her face soft with maternal concern. "Where has she been?" Priscilla whispered. "Mrs. Nancy was looking for her after her nap." "She was with me," Elvis said quietly, adjusting Lisa Marie's position in his arms. "We were making music." Something in his tone made Priscilla look at him more closely. She could see that something significant had happened, something that had moved her husband deeply. Elvis had many moods and many faces, but she recognized this particular expression. It was the same look he got when he had written a song that meant something special to him, or when he had connected with an audience in a way that transcended ordinary performance. "What kind of music?" she asked, following him into Lisa Marie's nursery. Elvis carefully laid their daughter in her crib, tucking a soft blanket around her small form. Lisa Marie stirred slightly but didn't wake, her face peaceful and content in sleep. "She found my microphone," Elvis said, his voice filled with wonder. "Priscilla, you should have seen her. She took to it like she was born for it. She was singing, or trying to sing, and there was something about the way she held that microphone. It was like she understood what it was for." Priscilla moved to stand beside him at the crib, looking down at their sleeping daughter. Her heart was still racing from what Elvis had just told her. She had always known that Lisa Marie was special, but hearing Elvis describe their musical session with such wonder and emotion made her realize that they might be witnessing the beginning of something truly extraordinary. "She's always been musical," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and concern. "She hums along when you play the piano, and she dances whenever she hears music on the radio. But I've noticed other things too." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When you're away on tour and I play your records, she stops whatever she's doing and just listens. Really listens. Not the way most toddlers do. She tilts her head like she's trying to understand something complex and beautiful." Priscilla's eyes filled with tears as she continued. "Last week, when you were in Las Vegas, I was playing Love Me Tender while I was folding her clothes. She started humming along. But Elvis, she wasn't just making noise. She was finding harmonies. A 2-year-old was creating harmonies to your voice on the record player." The magnitude of what they might be witnessing began to settle over both of them. This wasn't just a cute family moment. This could be the beginning of a legacy, a passing of musical gifts from one generation to the next. "This was different," Elvis insisted. "This was, I don't know how to explain it. It was like watching myself at that age if I had been given access to a microphone in a music room." She wasn't just playing with it, Priscilla. She was performing. They stood together in the soft light of the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, the sounds of Memphis in the evening drifted through the windows. Traffic on Elvis Presley Boulevard, the distant sound of music from Beale Street, the ordinary sounds of a city settling into night. But inside Lisa Marie's nursery, there was a sense of something extraordinary having taken place. Elvis felt like he was standing at the threshold of a new understanding about his daughter, about music, about the mysterious ways that talent and passion are passed from one generation to the next.
"Do you think she'll be a singer?"
Priscilla asked, voicing the question that was in both their minds. Elvis was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I don't know," he said finally, "and I don't want to push her toward it or away from it. But today, watching her with that that microphone. There's something there, Priscilla. Something real and powerful and beautiful. He reached down and gently smoothed Lisa Marie's curls, his touch tender and protective. Whatever she chooses to do with her life, whatever path she takes, I want her to have music, not as a burden or an expectation, but as a gift, the way it was a gift to me when I was her age. Priscilla nodded, understanding. She had watched Elvis struggle with the weight of expectations, with the pressure to constantly live up to his reputation and his legend. The last thing either of them wanted was for Lisa Marie to feel that same pressure, to have her childhood stolen by the demands of a musical career before she was old enough to choose for herself. But they had also both witnessed something remarkable that afternoon, something that suggested that music might not be a choice for Lisa Marie so much as an inevitability. Some people were born to make music, and today had provided the first real evidence that their daughter might be one of those people. As they prepared to leave the nursery, Elvis took one last look at his sleeping daughter. In the soft light, she looked so small and vulnerable, but he could still see traces of the confident little performer who had commanded his microphone just hours earlier. "Sweet dreams, little darling," he whispered. "Dream about music." The next morning brought new routines and responsibilities, but Elvis found his thoughts returning again and again to the previous evening's musical session with Lisa Marie. During breakfast, he mentioned it to Vernon, who smiled and said that he had heard music coming from the music room but hadn't wanted to interrupt. "Sounded like you had company," Vernon observed, buttering his toast. "The best kind of company," Elvis replied, glancing over at Lisa Marie, who was sitting in her high chair, babbling cheerfully, and occasionally reaching toward the radio on the kitchen counter. Over the following days, Elvis found himself paying closer attention to his daughter's interactions with music. He noticed how she would stop whatever she was doing whenever a song came on the radio. He watched her dance in her own toddler way, swaying and bouncing to rhythms that seemed to move her from the inside out. But it was the subtle details that truly amazed him. Lisa Marie had developed what could only be described as musical preferences. When the radio played classical music, she would become very still and attentive, as if absorbing every note. Rock and roll made her bounce and move with infectious energy, but it was gospel music that seemed to touch her most deeply. She would close her eyes and sway gently, sometimes even lifting her little hands as if she were in church. Vernon noticed it too. One morning at breakfast, he observed Lisa Marie sitting in her high chair, humming a melody he didn't recognize while playing with her cereal. "That little girl's got your gift, son," he said quietly to Elvis. "I've been watching her, and she's not just musical. She's got that thing you have, that ability to feel music in her bones." Most remarkably, he observed that she had begun to gravitate toward the music room whenever the door was open. She would toddle in with purpose, making a beeline for the microphone stand, as if it were an old friend waiting for her return. Sometimes Elvis would find her there in the mornings, standing next to the microphone stand, chattering to it in her incomprehensible toddler language, as if they were having a serious conversation about music. Elvis began to incorporate these impromptu musical sessions into their daily routine. After lunch, when the house was quiet and Lisa Marie was alert and energetic, he would take her into the music room for what he began to think of as their jam sessions. These weren't structured or formal in any way. Elvis would sit at the piano and play whatever came to mind. Sometimes bits of songs he was working on, sometimes old gospel hymns, sometimes just chord progressions that sounded interesting. Lisa Marie would take her position at the microphone and add her own vocal contributions, which grew more sophisticated and musical with each passing day. Word of these sessions began to spread among the Graceland staff, and each member of the household had their own observations about Lisa Marie's remarkable musical development. Mrs. Nancy, the nanny, would often find excuses to pass by the music room during these times, drawn by the unusual and enchanting sounds coming from within. "I've been caring for children for 30 years, she confided to the head housekeeper one afternoon. "But I've never seen anything like this. That child doesn't just sing, she performs. When she has that microphone, her whole personality changes. She stands straighter, she projects her voice, she even gestures like she's seen her daddy do on television." The housekeeping staff learned to schedule their cleaning around these musical interludes, not wanting to interrupt something that was clearly special. Mary, the head housekeeper, would often pause outside the music room door, her cleaning supplies forgotten in her hands, listening to the magical sounds of father and daughter making music together. "It's like listening to two languages being spoken at the same time," she explained to her sister over the phone. Mr. Elvis, with his deep, rich voice, and that little baby with her sweet, clear tones, and somehow they understand each other perfectly. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. The kitchen staff began timing their meal preparations around these sessions too. They discovered that the sound of Elvis and Lisa Marie singing together created a peaceful atmosphere that seemed to enhance everything they were doing. Bread rose better, sauces came together more smoothly, and even the most complex dishes seemed to prepare themselves when that music was floating through the house. Even Colonel Parker, during one of his visits to Graceland, paused outside the music room and listened with a mixture of amusement and professional interest. "She's got rhythm," he observed to Priscilla, who had joined him in the hallway, "and she's not afraid of the microphone." "Elvis says she's a natural," Priscilla replied, though there was a note of protective concern in her voice. She had seen what the music industry could do to people, even those as strong and talented as her husband, and the thought of her young daughter being exposed to that world was both thrilling and terrifying. As weeks passed, Elvis began to document these sessions in his own way. He would sometimes record them on a small tape recorder, not for any professional purpose, but simply to capture the joy and spontaneity of these moments. These recordings became some of his most treasured possessions, more valuable to him than any gold record or sold-out concert. Each tape captured a different aspect of Lisa Marie's musical evolution. On one recording from early November, her voice could be heard experimenting with different vowel sounds, creating what almost sounded like an ancient language set to melody. By late November, she was clearly attempting to match pitches, her little voice rising and falling in response to the notes Elvis played on the piano. The most remarkable recording was made in early December, when Lisa Marie spontaneously began singing what could only be described as a lullaby. It had no words, but it had structure, verses and a chorus, dynamic changes, even what sounded like an emotional climax. Elvis had stopped playing piano entirely on this recording, simply listening in amazement as his 2-year-old daughter created an original composition. Listening to these tapes later, alone in his study, Elvis would marvel at the musical conversation he and Lisa Marie were having. Her vocalizations had evolved from simple babbling to something that clearly resembled singing. She was developing her own style, her own way of using her voice as an instrument. What amazed him most was her fearlessness. She would attempt vocal techniques that many adult singers wouldn't dare try, not because she was trained, but because she felt them. More than that, she was learning to respond to music, to feed off the energy of what she was hearing, and give it back transformed by her own unique perspective. This was the mark of a true musician, the ability to take musical input and create something new and personal from it. One evening, after a particularly magical session in the music room, Elvis sat at his desk and tried to put his feelings about these experiences into words. He had always been better at expressing himself through music than through writing, but this felt important enough to attempt. "Today, Lisa Marie and I made music together," he wrote. "Not the kind of music that gets recorded or performed, but the kind that exists only in the moment it's created. She's 2 years old and she understands something about music that some people never figure out in a lifetime of trying. She knows that music is conversation, that it's play, that it's joy given sound." He paused, pen hovering over the paper, trying to capture something that seemed to slip away whenever he tried to pin it down with words. "Watching her with that microphone, I remember why I fell in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about being famous or making money or even about being good at it. It was about the feeling you get when you find the right note, the right rhythm, the right words. It was about connections to yourself, to other people, to something bigger than yourself." Elvis looked up from his writing and gazed out the window at the Graceland grounds, peaceful in the evening light. Somewhere in the house, Lisa Marie was probably sleeping, dreaming whatever dreams 2-year-olds dream. He hoped that some of those dreams were filled with music, with the memory of microphones and melodies, and the joy of making sounds that pleased her ear and touched her heart. The impact of that first afternoon in the music room continued to ripple through their lives in ways both large and small. Elvis found himself looking at his own career differently, remembering that music was supposed to be fun, that performance was supposed to be a form of play elevated to art. The joy he experienced during his sessions with Lisa Marie began to to infuse every aspect of his professional life. His band members were the first to notice the change. During rehearsals, Elvis seemed more relaxed, more willing to experiment and take risks. He would stop in the middle of a song and suggest trying a different approach, not because the original wasn't working, but because he wanted to explore new possibilities. This spirit of playful exploration was something he had carried with him from those early days at Sun Studios, but it had been buried under years of commercial pressures and expectations. "It's like working with a different person," his guitar player confided to the bass player during a break. "He's still professional, still incredibly talented, but there's something lighter about him. He's having fun again." The producers and sound engineers noticed it too. Elvis's voice had a new quality, still powerful and distinctive, but infused with a joy that hadn't been there before. His timing was more relaxed, his phrasing more adventurous. He seemed willing to let songs breathe, to find spaces for spontaneity and surprise. When he returned to the recording studio for his next session, he brought with him a renewed sense of joy and spontaneity that surprised everyone involved. His voice had a lighter quality, and his interactions with the musicians were more playful and collaborative. During one session, he even stopped recording to tell the musicians about Lisa Marie's musical adventures, his face lighting up with parental pride as he described her fearless approach to the microphone. "Something's different about Elvis," one of the backup singers observed during a break. "He seems, I don't know, happier somehow." The producer nodded in agreement. "More relaxed, maybe. Less pressured. Whatever's causing it, I hope it continues. This is some of the best work he's done in years." Elvis knew exactly what was causing it. It was the memory of Lisa Marie's fearless approach to the microphone, her absolute trust in music as a source of joy rather than judgment. She had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, that music, at its core, was about love. Love for sound, for rhythm, for the human voice in all its imperfect beauty. Love for the connection that happens between performer and audience, whether that audience is one person or 50,000. Love for the mystery of how certain combinations of notes and words and timing can reach inside a person and touch something that can't be touched any other way. As the months passed, Elvis began to understand that Lisa Marie had given him more than just a few delightful afternoons of musical play. She had given him a gift that would influence his approach to music for the rest of his career. She had shown him how to be fearless at the microphone again, how to approach each song as an opportunity for discovery rather than a test to be passed. And perhaps most importantly, she had shown him that music was not something to be hoarded or rationed or saved for special occasions. Music was something to be shared, to be celebrated, to be offered freely to anyone who had ears to hear and heart to feel. In the years that followed, as Lisa Marie grew from a toddler into a young girl, her musical abilities continued to develop and strengthen. But that first afternoon in the music room at Graceland, when she was just 2 years old and fearlessly reached for her father's microphone, remained the foundation of everything that came after. It was the moment when the king of rock and roll discovered that he had raised a princess who was not afraid to sing.